You're right. Sound like you sprung a leak.
Do you notice that like when you start out like loud and then get quieter and then quiet down? No.
No, I just stare at people until they stop talking. It's remarkably effective. Let me talk to you at the outset of the assessment for this particular material. You will be asked during this unit to write an in-class essay, 42 minutes, in which you apply Aristotle's theory of tragedy to your particular work. So while we talk about Aristotle's theory of tragedy, think about how you can use this theory to interpret the play that you've been assigned. Agamemnon, Antigone, Medea, what have you. You will have to sit here for 40 minutes and write an essay in which you use quotations from Aristotle to explain to a reader what exactly is going on with that tragedy. Which means that you not only should understand basically what Aristotle's saying, but probably have some sort of catalog of quotations that might be useful to use in such an essay. So understand his ideas, ask me questions about them, and be ready to quote him as need be in an essay. Brief word about Aristotle. Those of you who are not familiar with the ancient Greek philosopher, for a large portion of Western history, he was the final word on just about every single subject that you could imagine, including the sciences. He wrote quite a few books on biology, physics, and other sorts of sciences that you study in school, but chances are very good that you've never studied Aristotle in those disciplines. That's because, of course, science has moved on and left Aristotle behind. Historians might be interested in his scientific writings, but they're not current science, so they're irrelevant. Such is not the case with his theories regarding art or ethics. Aristotle is still one of the foundational theories of ethics that you would study if you're going into a philosophy class. He also provides some of the most important theories of communication and arts. So we're studying 2,500-year-old work because nothing about art has significantly changed besides the technology. But we still communicate stories in the same sorts of fashions. So people talking about theory today are probably talking about what Aristotle said. And Shakespeare knew his Aristotle and wrote his theories, or wrote his plays taking into effect some of the theories that Aristotle wrote about and so on. So even though it's 2,500 years old, it's directly relevant right now. Let's start with the tragic hero. And of course, we may make reference occasionally to Oedipus, the story that you heard yesterday. So just give me some answers. Aristotle provides 6 answers for what a tragic hero should be. Give me one. Yeah, Brian. What does that mean to you, good? Excellent. Does that mean they're perfect? Of course not. Can you think about a character from narrative that you would consider to be a good person but maybe makes mistakes? Not necessarily. Any narrative. Stories that you've read in school, things that you've seen on television or film. Character who may seem rough on the outside but probably has a good heart. Boo Radley. Excellent. What are some of Boo Radley's motivations that you consider to be moral or good? Very good. Even though there's a story that he was guilty of some violence against one of his family members, which is probably true. He was probably a juvenile delinquent and probably engaged in vandalism. So he's made mistakes. Yet at his core, he's a good person. Excellent example, Brienne. Thank you. Next quality. Blake. True to life. Realistic. Blake, can you give me an unrealistic character from narrative? Uh-huh. Unrealistic character from stories. Really? Anybody? Disney princesses. Realistic or unrealistic characters? For what reason, Tegan? Give me a specific example of one. You're saying that they are near perfect and people try to be like them, but we can't be like them. Give me an example of a princess that is perfect.
Like Cinderella.
Cinderella is a great example. I would take issue with an example like a Belle or Mulan or something, another Disney protagonist. I think they're a bit more, or, well, let's not talk about Ariel. I would take issue with somebody else, but Cinderella is a perfect example. Talk to me about how Cinderella is unrealistic.
Because, like, the rags to riches story
Mm-hmm.
is not really.
But you're talking about plot. Hold on. We're talking about character. The rags to riches story you're saying is unrealistic. Great, you've got an unrealistic plot. But let's talk about Cinderella herself. How is she unrealistic?
If your stepsisters were, like, taking over on you,
Yeah.
you're going to be mean to them. Like, you're not going to be this happy person.
She's constantly unflappably happy. Unflappable means you just can't stop them. They're never distracted. They're never disrupted. She's always happy and singing songs and just like this perfect sort of, the sun will come out tomorrow kind of Pollyanna character. Yes, I know. Thank you. I agree with you. I think Cinderella is an example of an unrealistic character. I don't think we see people like that in real life. Another quality, Paulina. Yeah. This is an interesting tension that he describes. Even though they should be realistic, they should be a little bit better than us. Why? Because they should be a mix of what we are and what we hope to be. And think about it this way. I should look at that person and see who I am right now. And I should see the person that I want to be. One is the level of identification, realistic. The other is the level of attraction or idealization. Like,
So I was confused. We're saying, like, each character should have all these? Or
yeah, some of what he's saying can apply to any character, but I understand that Aristotle's prose is a little bit unclear. We're primarily talking about the tragic hero. But he could be talking about Jocasta or Creon or somebody else in some of these. But when we look at a lot of these characteristics, like the idealized especially, Creon's not really idealized. Jocasta's not idealized. Oedipus is. Oedipus is like a god on earth. Okay, so let's focus on the tragic hero mostly. Other qualities, Tyler. What does that mean? No, you've got it. Yeah. You know, that is an example. Yeah. No, Tyler, you know exactly what you're talking about. You may not have confidence that you know what you're talking about, but you do know what you're talking about. What might be confusing to you, Tyler, is the fact that this seems so archaic. It seems so outdated. It seems so reactionary. Why? Because he's basically saying that women should act like women and men should act like men. Slaves should act like slaves, and people should act appropriate to their place. Yes, there's a certain amount of sexism in Aristotle. Most of what Aristotle is saying here applies perfectly well to any story you want to interpret right now. Cinderella, SpongeBob. However, SpongeBob, by the way, example of unrealistic character, not because he's a sponge, but because he's, yeah, so incredibly happy. I know. He's like Cinderella. Cinderella and SpongeBob. There's your college thesis right there. However, at this point, he seems to be a bit sexist. He seems to be like he's talking about character restrictions that we wouldn't hold today. Everything else seems to be fine. What else might we have? Yeah, Tim. Consistent. And this, Blake, might be one of those areas where he could talk about any character. Every character in a play should be consistent. They should act consistently. Anything else? Paulina? That you're talking about the plot, once again. The plot events must be necessary, probable. They must, A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D in a necessary and probable fashion. You got of the character?
Yeah, because, like, characters must be logically constructed according to the law of probability or necessity.
Oh, in other words, what they're doing, the necessary is the word that I want to get away from because he also uses it to refer to the plot. and I'm going to use the word necessary to refer to the plot. So when he's talking about, give that quote again.
Characters must be logically constructed according to the law of probability or necessity.
Right. So not only must they be consistent, but they must act in some sort of rational, realistic fashion. And this seems to merge with his point about true to life and realism. There seems to be some overlap in what he's saying. Let's go to his words. Number one that you already hit. This character must be good, as Brienne stated, and good we understand to be moral. And I've stated furthermore that this concept of sympathy, when you feel for somebody, is the first step in a narrative concept that is extraordinarily important, called identification. I must be able to see myself in that character. If not, I don't care about that character. It doesn't work. So the person must be good. And one of my favorite examples would be, Bree brought up Boo Radley, but I also like to look at Severus Snape, a character that acts out of a motivation of love, but makes decisions and mistakes that we might consider to be abusive in nature, irrational, and yet at the core, the character is somehow like us, because we can understand that we make mistakes when we are overwrought with emotions of love. Second thing to aim at is propriety, and this is the one that Tyler mentions. Character must possess virtues that are appropriate. So he uses the word, or the translators use the word propriety, and that word may seem a little bit foreign to you and uncomfortable. So use the word appropriate. And realize that he is talking in a little bit of a sexist fashion there. Tyler, is hands raised? No? Allie. That we brainstormed?
Yes.
This one? Fitness.
Oh.
Thirdly, character must be true to life. Character must be realistic. Cinderella is not a realistic character. SpongeBob is not a realistic character. Can you think of any characters besides those that we've mentioned in a story that you might look at and say, yep, that seems like me or people I know. That's a real person out of real life. Twilight. I heard it. I heard somebody say that. That's going to open up a big can of worms. Let's not debate that one. It's okay, Reba. Give me a character that you think is pretty realistic. Yeah. Naomi. Okay. Seems to be pretty realistic because she's a child, doesn't really know much of what's going on. She's a woman who hasn't really achieved very much in her life and seems kind of uncomfortable with her life, sometimes confused, not very idealized, not very glorious. Yeah, she's pretty realistic. Blake.
Well, would it go on being the fact that she's rebelling against the men saying she can't be in the war?
Mulan would be realistic in the sense that she expresses a fairly typical rebellious adolescent sort of mood. Adolescents tend to be rebellious, especially somebody who feels that they are the subject of persecution by sex or race or something like that. So she seems to react in some of those ways that are realistic. We could debate whether she's realistic in what she does in the war, but perhaps her motivations seem to be realistic. Yes? Are realistic or unrealistic? Yeah? Noah's realistic? You hope he is. We had this hold on. We had this discussion in an earlier class period. And I will contend, and feel free to argue with me, that Noah from the Notebook is about one of the most unrealistic characters in literature that you can get. Allie, hold on. I will say that Noah is a representation of what every woman wants a man to be. Will you agree with me on that?
Yes.
But ladies, if you're hoping to go out there into adulthood and find Noah, I'm sorry, but you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Because we're not like that. I wish we were. I wish we were all handsome, intelligent, writes poetry. Are you kidding me? Builds our own house, lives off the land, independently wealthy, and very understanding. He becomes wealthy. Reads to his dad on the porch. In a time of racial division, makes friends with black people. He's patient. He's patient and kind. Allie, he is what everybody wants a person to be. I agree with you on that. But I don't think he's very realistic because he doesn't seem to have a single flaw anywhere in his character construction whatsoever.
Okay, I didn't mean necessarily him. Like in general.
Okay. Sorry, Allie. That was vicious. I'm sorry. I read that book and my mouth kept dropping. Really? And he writes poetry. Yeah. Huh? I thought I just expressed that. A likeness which is true to life and yet more beautiful. The character must be an idealized version of ourselves. So this is that tension I was talking about, the idealization. Oedipus is full of flaws that we probably have. Arrogance, pride, temper, and yet at the same time he is capable of great things. And it's not just defeating the Sphinx, but it's his concern and leadership for his people that makes him truly great. And that's something that we all hope for, to have that sort of love for others and that power to protect others. So there's something about Oedipus that is what we all want to achieve. A person of a given character should speak or act in a given way by the rule of necessity or of probability. And there you go. Sorry for shutting you down earlier, Paulina. Must act according to the logic of the play. Jocasta, within Oedipus, starts to react by rejecting the investigation when she sees where it's going. That makes sense. Self-protection. Oedipus acts with anger when somebody accuses him of being a murderer of somebody he's never even met. It's rational. Oedipus investigates for the murderer when the people ask him to. It's rational. All of this seems to make sense in terms of the overall story of the play. Yeah. But that's not in the play. That's an excellent point, Carson. How about when he kills some guy on the road just for getting in his way? That's not part of what Sophocles is fictionally constructing. Okay. Oh, verse 6 then. Did I break my link? Huh. Is that the one? Oh, I'm sorry. I bounced around. We didn't do consistency yet. Character must act according to a consistent psychology. And it's very interesting that writers tended to draw away from this after Aristotle. And authors didn't really start to see the need for psychological realism again until the end of the 19th century, when characters started to become very psychologically realistic. We want to break this down into attributes of character. Character's got to be somebody that I can see myself in. Identification. I've got to be able to say, that's a person like me. Furthermore, person must be a little bit better, idealized, a great person. And lastly, the person's got to be good in some way. So you can take those 6 and kind of break them down into 3 key areas: goodness, realism, and idealization. And I prefer to break Aristotle's 6-part division down into a more manageable 3. It eliminates some of the redundancy, it eliminates some of the sexism, and just sort of develops this theory for easier use and application. And those are the 3 you're really going to look at. Is Medea a good person? hard to say that she's a good person when she kills her children, yet you could make a defense. Is Agamemnon a good person? Another child killer. So the defense will be interesting when you're writing that and applying. And in some places it'll apply perfectly. Aristotle's example of perfect application of this theory, according to him, is Oedipus the King. And I think that some of you will see where it applies very well in something like Agamemnon, but then there seem to be some breaks, and there are definite breaks in Medea. And we might also question who exactly that tragic hero is. If it's not Medea in Medea, who's the tragic hero? If Medea is not the focus of Medea, who would it be? Ooh, there's a good question then. If Antigone is not the focus of Antigone, who else would be the focus? Anybody reading it yet? Polynices is dead. Never sets foot on the stage. I'd say Creon. Picked up again on Tuesday when we will finish this.